Hi, my name is Mackenzie Delph, and I will be talking about my policy analysis for URB 240 Tom Holland's class at ASU Spring 2015. For my policy analysis, I chose to research social welfare policy. I really wanted to delve into this policy in specific because one of my really close friends is currently disabled, and he's been living off of disability and welfare payments from the government for about 6 years now. He got into a really bad car accident. It was near fatal. He was in a coma for 6 weeks. And so now, he's literally a miracle that he's alive, but he's disabled, unable to work. So he's been very dependent on the government and its provisions, and that's really opened my eyes to this policy and the good aspects of it and the aspects of it that really need to be improved upon. But to start, I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of social welfare, which is quite long. It began in the 1800s with volunteers who started settlement houses, such as Jane Addams and the Hull House, which is one of the most famous ones. The issue of social welfare policy, though, really came into light and got onto the policy agenda more towards the 1930s when the Great Depression was happening and FDR was in office. Because so many people were unemployed during the Great Depression, FDR and his administration really tried to engage the disabled and the unemployed, especially the unemployed, and get them back into society, back into the workforce. So he created many programs to engage that population to do just that. Some programs that were first created then and are still in effect today include Medicaid, the Women, Infants, and Children program, and also aid to families with dependent children. Since the years of its conception, social welfare policy has undergone several changes to adapt to the ever-changing demand of society and its unemployed and disabled population. The disabled today are treated a lot differently than they were back in the 1800s or even the 1930s, also with the unemployed. And so when that basis of how they're treated has changed, the policy has to change and adapt to fit and to correlate with that new viewing of that population. So during my research for this policy analysis, I found a few alternatives. There were not as many alternatives as I was anticipating finding to the current social welfare state and the policy to address that issue. But some of the alternatives that I did find were pretty interesting. One alternative that has not really received much attention or has not really been published about much is the alternative of privatizing the welfare state. This alternative has really received a lot of flack and it's had a lot of controversy, mainly because it would be a self-regulatory policy. And the private sector would not necessarily be bound to ensuring that those who really need this policy the most, the disabled and the unemployed, are receiving the necessary provisions that they need to survive, that they need to thrive and be productive citizens of this country. Another alternative to current social welfare role is the dissemination of provisions through nonprofit organizations. This seems to be a good route on the surface because nonprofits are all about helping people. The volunteers are there because they want to be there. However, the nonprofit sector doesn't really have the resources to address this problem and the scope of this problem. It's too big for the nonprofit sector. But also, an interesting possible solution that I found in my research is what is called multi-organizational policy. In this instance, all three sectors, public, private, and nonprofit, come together to create an innovative way to implement social welfare policy. So that could be a potential option in the future that hasn't really been sought out yet. But it could happen, and I think it's a very viable option. So the implementing of social welfare policy is a little bit different than the implementation of other policies, just because it reaches such a broad range of people. And with this policy, the implementers really have to take into consideration human dynamics and how people respond to things, and the sensitivity of a lot of these circumstances that people on the welfare roll are dealing with. So that's also something that kind of makes social welfare policy a bit unique. Also, in my research, when I was looking at how this policy is evaluated, it's difficult to truly analyze the outcomes of this policy and how effective it has been, but I do know that it can definitely be more effective than it has been in the past, and that our nation is a nation of opportunity, of second chances, and not really one of charity. And that's basically what social welfare policy is now. It's charity, and that needs to change. We need to come up with a more effective way. We need to do better research and reform and change and get this policy to where it needs to be, so that we can be putting these unemployed persons back into the workforce, and so that we can be taking care of our disabled and making sure that they're not flying under the radar and that they're not just being tossed to the side, because they're still part of society. They're still active citizens, even though some may not see them that way. They truly are still part of this nation.